Noise, commotion, thousands of footsteps on tiles. That's how the story begins. The international airport of a big city has always been a symbol of new opportunities for Michael and Emily. Trips, meetings, small adventures. Today, this airport has become a place where the mundane will soon change to the unpredictable and painful. Michael walked forward, slightly accelerating his pace, holding tickets and passport in his hands. His eyes glided over the flight board. He carefully checked the numbers and departure time. Emily walked beside her, holding onto her bag, occasionally glancing at her phone screen, which flashed notifications. It would seem an ordinary moment, nothing unusual. A couple is in a hurry to catch a flight. But a careful observer might have noticed the small details. Michael glanced at Emily from time to time with mild concern. She was kind of tense. Her movements seemed a little more hurried than usual. Sometimes she stopped and checked what was in her bag, as if she was looking for something or hiding it. The airport was noisy. The hum of voices, boarding announcements, baggage scanners, the sound of suitcase wheels on tiles. All this created a background against which human dramas remained almost invisible. But Michael, as if sensing something was amiss, was watching Emily closely. He couldn't explain where this feeling of anxiety came from, but it was so strong that it almost pressed down on his chest. Passengers were milling around. Some were in a hurry, some were sitting on benches checking e-tickets. Children were running. Parents were trying to hold them in place. At first glance, the airport was just a place for people to move, but for Michael and Emily, this noise will soon become the backdrop of a tragedy. Emily smiled, noticing that Michael was thinking about something. "Is everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. He smiled back, but it was just a mask, because his heart was already starting to beat faster, anticipating that today's trip would be different from all the previous ones. They arrived at the reception desk. Michael handed over the passports and tickets, while Emily aimlessly looked around, as if trying to memorize every corner of the place. It seemed that every movement, every flicker of someone else's shadow could become important. Registration was quick. Michael took the boarding passes, and Emily held her bag on her shoulder. They moved towards the waiting area, passing through corridors filled with people of different nationalities, speaking different languages, carrying their suitcases and alarms. And it was here, in the midst of this stream, that the opportunity for future drama first appeared. The toilets, hidden behind doors at the end of the corridor, seemed to be a common piece of infrastructure. No one could have imagined that it was there, behind these walls, that a scene would unfold that would change their lives forever. But at that moment, Michael and Emily were still just a couple rushing to catch a flight. Nothing foreshadowed trouble, except that Michael felt a little anxious. He still did not realize that this anxiety was not accidental, but a harbinger of events that would soon become his personal drama. After check-in, Michael and Emily headed to the waiting area for their flight. Here, the noise no longer became just a background. It seemed to envelop them, creating a feeling of both bustle and isolation. Passengers were sitting in their seats, some were drinking coffee, some were checking laptops. Children were running around the rows, and boarding announcements were interspersed with melodious electronic board signals. Emily held her bag in her lap and nervously fingered the strap, trying to hide her excitement. Michael noticed the movement, but chalked it up to a routine pre-flight alarm. He still couldn't imagine that this anxiety had a completely different reason. The reader's attention is gradually shifting to more secluded corners of the waiting area. At the far end of the corridor, almost imperceptibly, is the entrance to the toilets. This place seems ordinary and unremarkable, but here, behind closed doors, the key scene of the story will soon unfold. People flit between the shops and cafeterias, not stopping anyone with their eyes. But it is precisely such places, toilets, corridors around corners, hidden from the main crowd, that provide an opportunity for personal intrigues and secret meetings. Emily seemed to intuitively feel where she could hide for a while. Her gaze briefly lingered on the bathroom door. She tried to hide it from Michael, but despite his preoccupation with reading the scoreboard and thinking about the flight, he noticed her gaze. At that moment, an invisible thread of tension appeared between them, invisible to others, but palpable to the reader. Michael, still unaware of anything in particular, noticed that Emily had become slightly distracted. She was checking her phone, changing her position as if she was looking for something. and then suddenly smiled at someone who was passing by. Perhaps it was a random person, but perhaps this was the first point of contact of the future drama. Airport toilets at this moment look almost like a maze. Long corridors, doors with booth numbers, mirrors and sinks where people hurriedly wash and check their appearance. It was here that Emily first felt the opportunity to retire, to do something hidden. The atmosphere of the toilet, cramped, slightly echoing, with the echo of footsteps and the sound of flushing, creates a sense of secrecy and tension. Michael sits down on a nearby bench, checks his tickets again, and notices Emily pausing at the bathroom door for a moment. He thinks it's just an accident, because there are a lot of people around. But the reader already understands. This place will become the scene of future betrayal. Meanwhile, passengers continue to stream past. Someone is talking on the phone, someone is reading a newspaper, but no one notices that literally outside the toilet door, the beginning of an event is unfolding that will change Michael's life forever. Here, amidst the noise and the usual hustle, a hidden drama is emerging that will soon come to light. Emily, pretending to check her phone, carefully examines the space by the toilet door. She sees an opportunity to be alone with Daniel, a man who later turns out to be a lover. And Michael, immersed in his thoughts about the flight and the usual logistics of the airport, does not even suspect how close the first point of irrevocable betrayal is. The waiting area, like the entire airport, seems safe and familiar, but it is here that the threads of the future drama begin to twist. The reader is already feeling anxiety, a premonition of a catastrophe that is about to unfold in full. Michael and Emily looked like a typical couple that would be easy to spot at the airport. He was wearing a classic dark suit, neatly styled hair, and a stern look that combined with a gentle tone when talking. She is wearing a light coat, with her hair neatly arranged in a bag over her shoulder, holding a flight ticket in her hands. Outwardly, they looked harmonious, as if they complemented each other perfectly. But the reality was more complicated than the first appearance. Michael was a calm, rational man, but with an inner anxiety that he rarely showed. He was used to controlling the situation, planning every step, and even a small surprise could knock him out of his usual rhythm. Emily was more emotional and impulsive. She knew how to hide her feelings, but sometimes their manifestations betrayed her true mood. As they walked down the hallway, Michael gave Emily a little tug on the flight board. "Our flight is in 20 minutes. We shouldn't be late," he said calmly, but there was hidden anxiety in his voice. Emily smiled and replied with a short, "Yes, of course," but emotions were bubbling inside her. She felt a strange attraction to something new, something that could disrupt the usual rhythm of their lives. And although they were sitting next to each other and discussing the flight, an invisible distance had already begun to appear between them. Michael was completely focused on logistics and the flight, and Emily was on her own thoughts, which were already gradually moving towards intrigue, which Michael did not even know about yet. Michael noticed Emily's slight concern when she checked her phone. He thought it was a common pre-flight alarm. He still didn't realize that the alarm wasn't about the flight, but about something much more personal and secretive. Emily, on the other hand, was trying to keep herself in check. She was smiling, jokingly teasing Michael, creating the illusion of lightness and calm. Outwardly, everything looked perfect. Conversations about the flight, jokes, joint glances at the scoreboard. But deep down, she had already begun mentally trying on other scenarios, possible meetings, opportunities that opened up before her, but which Michael had no idea about. For the reader, these moments become the first alarm bells. The couple's external harmony hides internal contradictions. Michael is reliable, loyal, but slightly naive. Emily is emotional, intelligent, and able to manage impressions, but with a growing penchant for risky behavior. There is a light exchange of glances, laughter, and conversations about the flight. But every reader, watching them, begins to feel the tension, which will soon turn into drama. These details of behavior, small but significant, show that the idol is only on the surface and a conflict is already brewing beneath it, which is about to become the center of the story. In this chapter, we get to know the characters not only externally, but also internally. The reader sees their characters, weaknesses, habits, and most importantly, the first small signs that Michael and Emily's familiar lives will soon change forever. After a short pause in the waiting area, Emily was distracted by a man passing by. He moved confidently, with a slight smile, and there was a calm charisma in his gaze. It was Daniel. He was also waiting for his flight, but somehow his attention turned to Emily. The chance meeting started innocently. Their gazes crossed for a split second, and Daniel nodded slightly in greeting. Emily felt a slight excitement, but immediately hid it behind a smile. For an outsider, it was an ordinary, random moment. Passengers meet each other's eyes, exchange short, polite signs. Daniel came closer, under the pretext of examining the flight board, and started a light conversation. He asked if Emily knew where the flight was coming from, where she needed to go next, and spoke in a friendly, casual manner. Emily answered politely, smiling. Her tone was light, but there was a slight excitement in the depths. At first glance, the conversation was harmless. They exchanged a few phrases about the flight, the weather, and the noise at the airport. But beneath the surface, the reader already notices nuances, glances, barely noticeable touches to the bag, a slight play of intonation in Emily's voice. This is the beginning of a small but significant intrigue. Daniel turned out to be an attentive and observant person. He quickly picked up subtle signals that Emily herself was not fully aware of. For him, it was a game, soft, almost innocent at first glance. He expertly held Emily's attention, asking questions to which she unwittingly answered longer than she intended. Michael was busy checking the ticket at the time and didn't notice the new participant in their story at all. Everything remained familiar to him. The airport, waiting for the flight, the noise around. He didn't see what was already forming between Emily and Daniel, a small spark that would soon ignite into a flame. Emily felt a strange combination of excitement and guilt. It seemed to her that it was just a short, innocent conversation, but her heart was beating faster. The reader can already feel the tension. Every smile, every movement of Emily towards Daniel become the building blocks of a future dramatic scene. At the end of the chapter, Daniel suggested that Emily show him where the cafe is located next to the toilets in order to grab a coffee and stretch a little. Emily agreed without thinking about the consequences, but it is clear to the reader that this is not just a walk. It is the first step towards a secret meeting that will soon become a key event in the story. Daniel seemed perfect at first glance. Confident, charming, with a slight smile that could melt any caution. But behind that exterior was the ability to control the attention and emotions of others. He was observant, quick to read signals that most people didn't even notice. From the first moment of communication with Emily, he showed himself friendly, but at the same time left room for mystery. His questions about the flight, and the airport were just a cover in order to understand how Emily reacts to attention and how much distance she keeps. He skillfully balanced on the edge of innocence and flirtation, creating a sense of safe intimacy. Emily quickly felt that it was easy to talk to him. He knew how to listen and ask questions that you want to answer, even if it's a little more than necessary. She felt a slight arousal, an attraction she hadn't felt around Michael before. The reader is already seeing the first hints of Emily's emotional vulnerability and the potential for future intrigue. Daniel was in no hurry. He understood that haste was ruining the effect. His every move, every word, was carefully thought out. A light touch on his wrist when he accidentally handed over the phone, a soft intonation, a smile that lingered a little longer than usual. All this created a sense of intimacy, invisible to others, but palpable to Emily. At the same time, Daniel was cunning. He never gave rise to suspicion. Everything was played out in such a way that even casual observers, including Michael, would not be able to guess the hidden intentions. The reader sees how masterfully he creates the illusion of a chance meeting, which hides the planned intrigue. Emily, realizing the growing excitement and attraction, began to experience an internal conflict. On the one hand, Michael is her husband, stability, and a familiar life. On the other hand, Daniel, a new impulse, energy, the opportunity to feel welcome and free. Michael began to notice slight changes in Emily's behavior. She checked her phone more often, was a little nervous, and tried not to linger in one place. Sometimes her answers to simple questions seemed evasive. One day, as they were walking down the corridor to the boarding area, Michael noticed that Emily suddenly changed her route, as if she wanted to pass by someone or something. He did not attach much importance to this, writing it off as an accident. In the waiting area, Michael tried to talk to Emily about the day's plans. He asked the usual questions. Do you remember where we'll meet after boarding? Or have you packed everything? Emily answered briefly, avoiding unnecessary details, which made him slightly suspicious. Michael began to pay attention to minor inconsistencies. For example, Emily would say that she needed to go to the bathroom, but then she would go in a different direction, making up excuses. Sometimes she stayed a few minutes longer than she talked. He didn't know the exact reason for her behavior, but he sensed that something was going on. These initial suspicions were still vague and had no concrete basis. Michael tried to figure out what had changed, but everything looked random and incomprehensible. Emily continued to behave as usual, smiling and jokingly answering Michael's questions, so he had no open evidence. Her doubts only grew, reinforced by her reticence and subtle slight anxiety. Emily understood that Michael's behavior was beginning to change. His questions became more attentive, his gazes sharper, and his movements more observant. It was important for her to remain calm and create the illusion that everything was as usual. When Michael asked where she was going after leaving the waiting area, Emily replied calmly, without hesitation, I just want to go for a walk, see the store, then I'll be back. She didn't mention that she might cross paths with Daniel or other people she met. Every step she took was calculated so that Michael wouldn't notice the slightest oddity. Emily also used the phone as a cover. She was checking her messages, pretending to read the notifications, but in fact it was time to think over her actions and plan further meetings. Michael only saw the usual behavior. She was just texting, like many passengers. In the waiting area, she sat down in an empty seat, pretended to flip through a magazine or check her email, while her mind was preoccupied with other things. Sometimes she looked away slightly, but she quickly returned to the conversation with Michael or answered his questions. Her movements were natural, light, without the slightest signs of tension. When Michael noticed that she was delayed for a few minutes, Emily immediately came up with an excuse. I just looked at the flight schedule. Suddenly the gate was changed. She smiled and touched his hand, as if to reassure him. Michael nodded, relaxing slightly. It seemed to him that she really wasn't hiding anything. Even in the bathroom, Emily was adept at hiding her intentions. She walked so that Michael couldn't accidentally look around the corner, chose the time when he was busy with his business, and always returned to the waiting area on time. Her every move was deliberate. She knew how to avoid suspicion, but at the same time planned a meeting that would soon become a key one. In addition, Emily used small distractions. She laughed, asked questions about the flight, the coffee, the store nearby, and discussed the weather to distract Michael's attention from her true thoughts. He gradually calmed down, agreeing that perhaps all this was really a common anxiety before the flight. She understood that any mistake could destroy the illusion, so she controlled the tone of voice, facial expressions, and posture. She sounded casual enough for Michael to believe that everything was okay. Even if he suspected something strange, he couldn't find any confirmation. Emily felt confident, because the ability to manage Michael's attention gave her room for maneuver. She knew exactly when to act and when to pretend. Her strategy was simple: to create an appearance of transparency and at the same time hide her true intentions. Michael was still feeling a little uneasy. His suspicions gradually intensified, but they were not directed in the right direction. He tried to find an explanation for Emily's strange behavior, but logic told him the wrong options. He began to notice people around him: Emily's work colleagues, acquaintances from past meetings, housemates, and even casual passengers. He attributed all this to a possible betrayal. For example, he saw a man who spoke to Emily on the phone last week and decided that it was one of her friends who was now secretly communicating with her. He followed their movements, analyzed every look and gesture, drawing conclusions that had nothing to do with reality. Emily, watching his growing concern, did her best to channel his suspicions in the wrong direction. She told stories about friends, colleagues, and events that might explain his anxiety, but without mentioning Daniel. For example, she would say, "Oh, it's just Jake from the office. We were discussing a work project." Or, "This man is my neighbor. He asked me to help with the luggage." Michael nodded, taking the explanation at face value, although there was still some shadow of doubt inside. In the waiting area, Michael tried to catch the moments when Emily was distracted. She sometimes turned away, smiling at someone he didn't notice. He decided that it was nothing serious, but he still noticed details that seemed strange. Short smiles, quick conversations on the phone, unexpected delays in movements. He even began analyzing her actions in the bathroom, when she left, where she went, and how much time she spent inside. He tried to connect it to someone else, maybe Daniel, but he couldn't remember his face. Therefore, Michael's suspicions focused on people he knew: colleagues, acquaintances, friends. Emily kept her cool at this time. She not only skillfully hid the real connection with Daniel, but also directed Michael's attention to false tracks. She commented on his assumptions with a slight smile. Yes, maybe that's true. Maybe I'm just too nervous about the flight. His attention gradually weakened, and the tension shifted in the wrong direction. With each observation Michael made, the situation became more complicated. The more he searched for evidence, the more confused he became. His suspicions were aimed at false goals, and the real betrayal remained invisible. Emily understood that Michael's suspicions were becoming more and more persistent. In order not to give him the slightest chance to guess about her secret actions, she decided to strengthen her disguise and make her actions even more transparent. When Michael started checking Emily's phone more often, she calmly showed him the screen, scrolled through messages, and even answered some right in front of him. Everything looked natural. She laughed, jokingly commented on the notifications, and pretended that she was not hiding anything. Michael nodded, calming down inwardly. He believed that now her behavior was completely consistent with the norm. Emily also planned her movements so that Michael could only see what he needed to see. If she needed to walk towards the bathroom or cafe, she chose moments when Michael was busy or walked within his line of sight, so that it seemed that she was just walking around the airport. Sometimes Michael would ask direct questions. "Where did you go?" Or "Who were you talking to?" Emily replied with a slight smile. "I just went to the information desk. It was an airport employee. I asked about the flight." The answers were honest, but they hid the main thing: her real meeting with Daniel. In the waiting area, she actively turned on conversations about distracting topics. Discussing the flight, cafes, shops, small jokes, all this worked as a distraction. Michael gradually calmed down, not noticing that his attention was still being diverted. Even in the bathroom, Emily created the appearance of a routine necessity. She quickly entered, checked her bag, put her hair in order, and then returned to the waiting area. Everything looked natural, like the usual actions of any passenger. When Michael tried to follow her, Emily acted gently but confidently. She slowed her pace slightly so that he could see her next to him, pretended to be focused on something simple, as if she wasn't thinking at all about something secretive. Emily also used social tricks. If Michael asked questions about people who might seem suspicious, she told plausible stories: work colleagues, childhood friends, casual acquaintances. Each of her explanations was supported by small details that looked natural and convincing. So, step by step, Emily reinforced the illusion of transparency. She created a space where Michael felt that his doubts were unfounded, while at the same time preserving the freedom for a future meeting with Daniel. Michael began to monitor Emily more actively. After the first suspicions remained without clear evidence, he decided to use the phone as a source of information. He knew that Emily rarely hid her correspondence, but now he wanted to make sure for himself. At first, Michael just watched how she held the phone, how quickly she answered messages, who she corresponded with. But that didn't seem enough to him. He wanted to see the details, check the contacts, see if there was anyone he needed to know about. When Emily was distracted for a while, Michael carefully took her phone. He scrolled through the correspondence, looked at the call history and notifications. Everything was in order: familiar friends, work contacts, family messages. At first glance, nothing betrays a hidden connection. Emily noticed his actions, but was not taken aback. She smiled softly and said, "Are you sure you want to check your phone? Let's just talk." This distracted his attention, and he postponed the attempt for a moment. Michael felt that talking could really provide more information than just looking at the phone, and agreed. Despite the apparent transparency, Emily had prepared in advance. She deleted unnecessary notifications, moved messages that might raise questions to folders, and pretended that everything was open. Her every move was well thought out. She knew that Michael might drop by, and she created the illusion of honesty beforehand. Michael was scrolling through his phone, trying to catch at least something suspicious. He analyzed messages, dates, and contact names, but everything looked innocent. He began to doubt his suspicions. Maybe I'm just too tense, he thought. But the tension didn't go away. Every time Emily got distracted or answered the phone, Michael couldn't help but watch her actions. He became more attentive, paying attention to the little things: who called, who wrote messages, which notifications appeared on the screen. Even after he returned Emily's phone, the feeling of anxiety did not leave him. He understood that perhaps something was hidden, but so far he could not find any confirmation. After trying to check the phone, Michael decided to increase surveillance. He walked beside Emily, trying to keep his appearance natural, but at the same time watching her every step. He noticed that she sometimes lingered at the shops, looked around, and slightly changed the route. Emily continued to behave calmly. She smiled, joked, and joked with Michael, creating the illusion of an ordinary walk through the waiting area. She was well aware that any tension could cause unnecessary questions, so she tried to behave as casually as possible. Michael tried to analyze who was passing by Emily: random passengers, people with suitcases, airport staff. He watched how she reacted to passers-by, but found nothing suspicious. Her every move was natural, but at the same time, he felt a slight anxiety, not understanding its cause. When Emily went to the bathroom, Michael pretended to check the flight board, but actually watched her actions. She went inside and came out a few minutes later, completely calm, as if she was just using the toilet. Michael nodded, relaxed for a moment, thinking that everything was under control. However, Emily had thought of this moment in advance. She chose a time when Michael was distracted by phones and the scoreboard to go to a meeting with Daniel. Every step she took was calculated. She maintained the appearance of normal behavior, but at the same time did what she had planned in advance. Michael continued to watch, but his attention gradually dissipated. He tried to find evidence, but Emily skillfully concealed her actions. Her every move looked like a normal activity: going to the bathroom, stopping at a cafe, checking her bag. When they met again in the waiting area, Emily smiled and talked about the flight, coffee, and shopping. Michael felt a little relieved, thinking that his suspicions were in vain. But in fact, Emily had already done what she was going to do. She had set the stage for a secret meeting that was about to unfold outside the bathroom doors. Emily stepped into the hallway leading to the bathroom, pretending she was just going to fix her hair and check her bag. Daniel was already waiting at the entrance, standing carefully in the shadows so that no one around could notice their meeting. As soon as the bathroom doors closed behind them, they were alone. The furniture was almost ordinary: tiles underfoot, mirrors along the walls, the sound of flushing water, the light echo of footsteps. But for Emily and Daniel, this space became a temporary privacy zone where they could be together. They exchanged a brief smile, which immediately set the mood. Without words, without unnecessary actions, Daniel was calm, leaning forward slightly, and Emily looked confident, but her gaze betrayed a slight excitement. The conversation was quiet, almost a whisper. They discussed details that didn't matter to others, but created a sense of intimacy and intrigue. Daniel talked about some little things that amused Emily and at the same time held her attention. She listened, answered softly, touching his hand with a casual movement that created a sense of innocent intimacy. At that moment, they were in a complete illusion of privacy. Emily felt a mixture of excitement and excitement, the realization that it was just the two of them, and no one was watching what she was doing. For Daniel, it was a game of control and attention. He knew how to hold her emotions and create a sense of privacy. Everything that happened was without violence and vulgarity. Their contact was limited to looks, light touches, and words that created a sense of emotional betrayal. They exchanged compliments, small jokes, and smiles, which to an outsider looked like ordinary communication, but for them were much more important. After a few minutes, Emily realized it was time to get back. They ended the conversation. Daniel smiled, and she returned to the waiting area as if nothing had happened. Her trip to the bathroom looked like the usual action of any passenger, and Michael did not suspect anything. After Emily returned from the bathroom, Michael noticed that she was behaving too calmly. She was smiling and jokingly talking, but something in her manner seemed unusual to him. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but the anxiety in his chest was getting worse. He began to pay attention to her every move: how she put her bag down, how she checked the tickets, how she communicated with the airport staff. Everything looked familiar, But the inner feeling of anxiety did not disappear. Michael tried to figure out what had changed, but there was no concrete evidence. Emily continued to create the illusion of an ordinary walk and tranquility. She walked beside him, discussing the flight, shopping, upcoming plans, but at the same time tried not to linger too long near the toilet or cafe, where they could cross paths with Daniel again. Michael decided that he should be more careful. He began to analyze every minute, every action of hers, trying to detect even the slightest oddity. He remembered Emily's recent delays, the short whispers on the phone, the quick movements. All this caused him internal tension, although there was no specific reason for the accusations yet. Emily, in turn, used this time to prepare the next steps. She understood that Michael's suspicions could grow, and she planned her actions so that everything remained within the normal range. She looked friendly, open, and calm, and Michael believed in her honesty, although an inner voice continued to sound the alarm. The next day, at the airport, Emily once again found herself in the middle of a planned meeting. She knew that Michael would be attentive, so she acted even more cautiously. In the waiting area, she pretended to read a magazine, check her phone, and look around like any passenger waiting for a flight. Daniel appeared unexpectedly, but so that no one would notice their meeting. He came up from the other side of the waiting area, lightly touched her elbow under the pretext of an accidental collision, and Emily smiled, pretending that it really was an accident. They walked towards the bathroom, choosing a moment when Michael was distracted by the boarding announcements and the flight board. Every step was well thought out. They avoided crowded places, walked quietly, talked quietly, almost in a whisper. Daniel talked about minor things, but the tone of his voice created a sense of trust and intimacy. Emily answered softly, nodding, sometimes smiling, softening her voice slightly to make everything look innocent. They were alone inside the bathroom. The furniture was familiar, tiles, mirrors, sinks. But for them, this space became a temporary privacy zone where they could communicate without witnesses. They talked about small things, plans for the day, funny observations, common interests. All this was created in such a way as to enhance the feeling of intimacy without resorting to physical actions. Emily could feel the excitement. Every time she returned to the conversation with Daniel, her heart beat faster. She knew that Michael might notice something suspicious, but she understood how important it was to remain calm and confident. Meanwhile, Michael was in the waiting area. He checked the tickets, looked around, sometimes went to the toilet, but did not notice them. Emily returned on time, so for Michael it looked like a normal trip to the bathroom. She was walking next to him, smiling, discussing the flight, pretending that everything was in perfect order. This meeting proved that the secret bond was strengthening. Emily and Daniel continued to interact, creating emotional intimacy, while Michael remained in the illusion of normalcy. Emily skillfully concealed her actions, using every detail, steps, looks, conversations, to convince Michael of her honesty. After leaving the bathroom, they stayed nearby for a few more minutes, watching people, discussing the flight, shops, and cafes. Everything looked natural, but at the same time, the bond between Emily and Daniel was growing stronger. Every word, every smile, every look created an emotional betrayal that Michael could not yet notice. By the end of the meeting, Emily returned to Michael completely calm and confident. She continued to discuss the upcoming flight, purchases, and flight details, creating the illusion of a familiar life. Daniel remained in the shadows, as if nothing had happened, but their bond had already been cemented. Emily knew that her next meeting with Daniel would have to be carefully planned. She considered each step, chose the time when Michael would be distracted, and thought out a route that would allow her to appear like an ordinary passenger. At the airport, she was calm again. Emily was checking her bag, looking around, slightly adjusting her hair. Her every step looked natural, as if she was just getting ready to fly. She talked to Michael about the flight, about boarding, about the shops nearby, pretending that all her attention was focused on ordinary things. Daniel appeared in advance, but to the side, so that Michael would not notice him. He watched Emily's movements, adjusted to her steps and signals. When Michael was distracted by a phone call or checking the scoreboard, Emily quietly approached Daniel. Their eyes met, and they understood without words that the moment had come. They headed for the bathroom, choosing the moment when the flow of people was minimal. Emily walked confidently, keeping calm so that Michael wouldn't suspect anything unusual. She was smiling, discussing the flight and shopping, pretending that she was just going for a quick smoke break or checking the toilet. Before entering the bathroom, they briefly exchanged words, quietly, almost in a whisper, but enough to understand each other. Daniel told her about his small plans for the day, and Emily answered gently, with a slight smile. Everything looked innocent, but there was a tension between them that determined the nature of their secret bond. Inside the toilet, the atmosphere remained familiar: tiles, mirrors, the sound of flushing water. But it was a place of solitude where Emily and Daniel could exchange emotions, words, and looks that no one else could see. They talked quietly about things that didn't matter to others, but created a sense of closeness and emotional betrayal. Every move was thought out: a light touch on the hand, a smile, a soft tone of voice. All this enhanced their mutual attraction, without violating the boundaries of decency. Emily was careful and confident in her actions, but inside she felt excitement and tension from the fact that hidden betrayal was happening right in front of her husband, even if he didn't know it yet. After the meeting, they returned to the waiting area. Emily was by Michael's side again, walking and smiling, discussing the flight, shopping, and cafes, giving the appearance of normal behavior. Daniel stayed away, walking to his side of the terminal, and no one noticed that something had happened between them. Emily entered the airport bathroom, this time with complete confidence and without apparent hesitation. Daniel was already waiting at the entrance, carefully choosing the moment when the flow of people was minimal, but still someone might notice the movement. Michael was nearby, busy checking his ticket and bag. He did not suspect that at this very moment something was happening that he could not even imagine. When the bathroom doors closed, Emily and Daniel found themselves alone, but not like the previous times. At that moment, another passenger accidentally entered the room, followed by several other people, a cleaner and a passenger who was looking for an empty booth. Daniel and Emily tried to act calmly, but now others began to notice their meeting. Emily was slightly embarrassed, but she maintained an appearance of confidence. She continued to talk quietly with Daniel, smiling, reacting to words using subtle hints and a glance, creating a sense of intimacy. People around noticed that something unusual was happening: glances, mixed emotions, a slight intimacy between them. At that moment, one of the passengers noticed Michael, who was trying to figure out what was going on, and looked towards the toilet. Emily quickly left, pretending that she was just using the stall, but now her behavior looked suspicious. She was walking next to Michael, smiling, but there was inner anxiety in her eyes, the first major mistake in disguise. Daniel stayed where he was, watching Emily return to her husband. People began to whisper among themselves. Some looked at what was happening in surprise, feeling the unusual atmosphere. Emily tried to keep up the usual conversation about the flight, shopping, and cafes, but the tension between her and Daniel had already become noticeable to others. Michael felt a growing tension. He noticed Emily's slight embarrassment, the strangeness of her smile, and the slight tremor in her voice. He hadn't seen the betrayal directly yet, but he was already beginning to suspect that something had happened. Emily understood that her illusion of control had cracked. Now the publicity of the event was beginning to make itself felt. Michael finally noticed that something was wrong. He saw Emily look slightly embarrassed when she came out of the bathroom, and how her gaze slid towards where Daniel was. At that moment, he realized that her behavior was not ordinary. Her smile was tense, her steps were accelerated, and her words were a little uncertain. His heart clenched with anxiety. He tried to remain calm, but the inner feeling of betrayal was already strong. Michael looked at the people around him. Some were looking at each other inquisitively, and someone had clearly noticed that something unusual was going on between Emily and Daniel. He remembered all the oddities of the last few days: delays, unexpected trips to the bathroom, phone checks, short answers to questions. Now all the pieces were coming together. Michael felt his suspicions turn into obvious knowledge. The betrayal had happened right in front of his eyes, even though he hadn't seen it before. Michael came closer to Emily, his voice flat but strained. "Emily, what's going on here?" He waited for an explanation, hoping it was all a misunderstanding, but inwardly he already understood the truth. Emily was trying to stay calm, smiling, but now her smile didn't hide her excitement. She knew that the game was over, and that her secret was out. She began to make excuses quietly. Michael, this is not what you think. But the words sounded empty, because the moment was already fixed not only in Michael's mind, but also in the eyes of the surrounding passengers. Michael felt a mixture of anger, resentment, and confusion. He could see that Emily's emotions and behavior were no longer consistent with her usual illusion of honesty. The feeling of betrayal became palpable physically. My heart was clenching, my breathing was speeding up, and my thoughts were racing between anger and pain. The surrounding people began to whisper and exchange glances. Michael realized that the situation was becoming public. The secret betrayal was no longer completely hidden. Emily, even if she tried to justify herself, could no longer fully control the consequences. After Michael noticed the oddities in Emily's behavior, the tension reached a peak. They were standing in the airport waiting area. People around glanced at each other briefly. Some were trying to figure out what had happened. Michael was calm outwardly, but inside he was seething with anger and resentment. He looked at Emily and said firmly, "I see everything. Explain what that means." His voice was steady, but there was a force in it that restrained emotions. Emily hesitated, her usual confidence faltering. She understood that it was impossible to hide the truth now. She tried to soften the situation by saying, "Michael, it's not what you think. I just—" But the words stuck in my throat because the truth was obvious. Michael took a step closer. His gaze was focused and cold. "Don't start making excuses. I've seen your behavior. This is treason." His voice left no doubt. Emily felt that the game was over. The passers-by around began to realize that something serious was going on between them. Some turned around, some whispered softly to each other. Emily realized that the situation had become public, and her actions could not go unnoticed. She tried to explain her motives, but Michael wasn't listening. He felt a betrayal that couldn't be ignored. His emotions were mixed: anger, resentment, disappointment. But there was also a desire to understand why this happened. Emily, seeing Michael's determination, felt fear and guilt. She knew that the consequences were inevitable. She tried to regain control of the situation, but now everything looked different. Her secret actions were revealed. The illusion of honesty was destroyed. Michael paused, gathering his thoughts, and said, "We have to deal with this now." His words sounded like the beginning of new, serious actions that would change their lives. After the betrayal became apparent, Michael felt a mixture of shock, anger, and betrayal. He stood in the waiting area, trying to collect his thoughts and figure out what to do next. All the details of the last few days were replaying in my head. Emily's strange delays, trips to the bathroom, her strange smiles and answers, short conversations on the phone, which now formed a single picture. He understood that emotions were at their peak, but decisions had to be made coldly and prudently. Michael took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down, and began to consider his options. His first impulse was to have a confrontation right here, among people, but he realized that this would only lead to a public scandal and even more trauma for himself. He decided to act strategically. Michael's first step was to collect evidence and record the facts he had observed at the airport. He mentally replayed what he had seen with his own eyes: Emily's strange looks, embarrassment, her trips to the bathroom, meetings with Daniel. All of this was important for future decisions. The next step was for Michael to start planning a conversation with Emily. He understood that an emotional reaction would not help now. Specific questions and answers were needed. He wanted to find out why it happened, how long it lasted, and what the motives were. He understood that any excuse could be a lie, but he needed to hear her version in order to make a decision about the future. Michael also thought about the legal aspects. He understood that their joint property, finances, and joint plans could be affected if the relationship was destroyed. He began to consider options: consulting with a lawyer, recording evidence for the division of property, and possible paperwork for a divorce. In addition to the practical steps, Michael reflected on his own feelings. He felt pain, betrayal, and resentment, but at the same time understood that emotions should not be allowed to control actions. He had to maintain his dignity in order to protect himself and his interests. Michael made a decision. First, to talk to Emily one-on-one, in a calm environment, without witnesses, in order to find out the truth. Then analyze the consequences and think over the next steps. He understood that emotions would be strong, but now he had to act wisely. Michael insisted that they talk in private, away from prying eyes. They found themselves in a quiet waiting area, where only the hum of planes and the occasional footsteps of passengers could be heard. Emily looked tense, her usual confidence gone, and the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her inner excitement. Michael began the conversation calmly, in an even voice, but with a palpable heaviness. "Emily, I saw what was happening in the bathroom. I need to know the truth. Oh, don't try to justify yourself right away. I want to hear an explanation." Emily took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. She knew that she couldn't hide anything anymore. "Michael, it's difficult. I I made a mistake." Her voice was trembling. Her eyes were full of a mixture of shame and regret. "With Daniel, it was an emotional attraction that I couldn't contain." Michael felt his heart tighten in his chest. Anger, pain, and betrayal mixed into one. "Emily, emotional attraction? Do you understand that this is a betrayal? Everything that we built, everything that I trusted you with. You ruined it." Emily was trying to explain herself. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm confused about my feelings. It wasn't a physical betrayal, but I know I betrayed your trust. I didn't want you to see it." Michael paused, trying to control his emotions. He could see her remorse, but it didn't lessen the pain. "Do you understand that trust is the foundation of any relationship? You went after the emotions that destroyed everything we built." Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, and I'm ready to accept the consequences. Only, I'm asking you to give me a chance to explain myself and fix something." Michael stood in silence for a few seconds, considering her words. He understood that emotions were running high, but decisions had to be considered. "We need time now. Time to figure out what to do next. I do not know if I can forgive, but I have to protect myself. We have to decide how to proceed, calmly, without impulses." After a frank conversation with Emily, Michael felt that emotions were still strong, but now it was necessary to act wisely. He realized that trust had been destroyed, and before making final decisions, he needed to assess the whole situation and prepare for the consequences. The first thing Michael decided to do was take a break. He asked Emily to leave him alone for a while to think about what had happened and collect his thoughts. He sat down on a bench in the waiting area, closing his eyes for a few minutes, feeling the weight of betrayal. Every detail of the last few days, Emily's trips to the bathroom, her strange smiles, meetings with Daniel, surfaced in memory, intensifying the inner pain. The next step was to think about practical actions. Michael realized that he needed to protect his interests, financial, legal, and personal. He decided to write down all the events, details, and observations that might be useful if it came to a division of property or an official divorce. He recorded in detail the date, time, place, witnesses, everything that could confirm the destruction of trust. He also began to think through the legal steps. Contact a lawyer, clarify the rules for the division of property, and discuss the possibility of divorce if the relationship proves impossible to restore. He understood that emotional pain should not turn him into a person who acts recklessly. Michael realized that it was necessary to maintain inner peace and control emotions, even if his heart screamed with betrayal. He began to make a plan of action. First, a personal conversation and an attempt to find out all the details, then a consultation with a lawyer, paperwork, and then a decision on further cohabitation or divorce. Emily was trying to be there at the time, but Michael left a space for him to collect his thoughts. He understood that conversations and emotions should be postponed to prevent impulsive actions that could only make the situation worse. Michael decided to act decisively, but deliberately. He began by documenting everything that had happened: surveillance recordings, dates, times, details of Emily's public meeting with Daniel in the airport bathroom, and witnesses. He understood that even if emotions subsided, the fact of betrayal would remain, and it was important to have evidence to protect his interests. The next step was to consult with a lawyer. Michael spoke in detail about all the events, provided notes, and explained the emotional and psychological damage he was experiencing. The lawyer helped him understand the legal consequences, explained the options for the division of property, alimony, and possible divorce. Michael realized that now he needed to act strictly within the law in order to protect himself and his rights. He also decided to split up the joint finances and review access to the accounts to prevent possible further manipulation. Michael organized the accounts, made copies of the documents, and put his personal finances under control to prevent repeated situations where his trust could be used against him. Emotionally, Michael was going through a process of realization. Every day began with inner reflections: how to overcome pain, how to regain a sense of confidence and dignity, how to rebuild his life so that betrayal did not determine his future. He began to keep a diary, recording thoughts, emotions, and plans for the coming weeks. This helped him to structure his experiences and gradually regain control of his own life. Michael also began conversations with close people, friends and relatives whom he trusted. They supported him, helped him look at the situation from the outside, and provided emotional support. This was important. Emily's betrayal had made him feel lonely, but communicating with supportive people helped him keep his sanity and calm. After the first steps towards legal and financial protection were taken, Michael began to work on the most painful part: the restoration of inner peace. The emotional pain, betrayal, and anger remained, but now he realized that he couldn't let those emotions rule his life. Michael started each morning with a short meditation and reflection on what had happened. He analyzed his feelings: pain, resentment, anxiety, but tried not to let them lead to impulsive decisions. He wrote down his thoughts in a diary, recorded what Emily's betrayal had taught him, and how he could use this experience for personal growth. Michael gradually regained his personal space and routine. He began to devote more time to physical activity, walks, meetings with friends, and activities that brought pleasure. He understood that it was important to regain control of his own time and feelings so that Emily's betrayal would not dictate his lifestyle. He also began to set new boundaries. Now he was more attentive to trust and personal information, realizing that emotional connections can be deceptive. This experience taught him to see the signs of distrust in advance, to understand the value of honesty and openness in a relationship. Michael realized that life goes on, even after betrayal. He stopped blaming himself and Emily for every moment, instead focusing on restoring inner balance. He realized that the past cannot be changed, but the future can be built. Over time, Michael began to take what happened as a lesson. Betrayal destroys trust, but it should not destroy the person himself. He gradually returned to social life, met with friends, made new plans and projects aimed at development and personal well-being.